here. Okay. Welcome, Comadres and Friends. I am Maria Ferrer, the project manager of Las Comadres and Friends National Latino Book Club. The book club's leadership team and I are pleased to have you join us tonight for our first ever Zoom teleconference. We've been planning this launch for months and are overjoyed to finally be live and face-to-face, as it were. We know you are excited as we are. Our books of the month for October were Crocodile Tears by Mercedes Rosende and Infinity Reaper by Adam Silvera. Unfortunately, those authors were not able to join us, but we are happy to say that our author of the month, Julia Amante, is with us tonight. And one lucky reader tonight will win a copy of Julia's new book, This Is Now. We'll announce the winner at the end of the interview. Before we get started, just some quick housekeeping notes. Please keep yourselves on mute. You can leave your videos on if you prefer. We recommend that everyone put themselves on speaker view, but if you do gallery, that's fine. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat, and Tess will be monitoring the chat, and we will pass along the questions to Julia. But note that we may not be able to get to all of them because we have lots of questions of our own. Before we give you a little history about our book club, I want to introduce to you our book club's leadership team. As you know, Nora Comstock is our national and international founder. Myself, the project manager. Julia Amante is our submissions coordinator, wave. Tess Tobin is our National Book Club Membership Coordinator. She's waving. Dora Maria Abreu is not with us tonight, but she does our social media coordination. And Karen Gonzalez, our Special Assistant Coordinator. Hi. So now we want to give you a little bit of history on our book club. Comadre Tess.
Hi everyone. Our first book club gathering was in July 2004 in New York at Comadre Maria Ferrer's apartment. After our hiatus, Nora Comstock re-envisioned and relaunched the book club nationwide to promote the work of Latino authors to every book lover, to bring our community to bookstores, and to support our writers. We started these teleconferences in October of 2006. We are now in our 14th year of sharing works by Latino authors with all of you. We created the teleconferences and book club in an effort to entice everyone to read more Latino authors, to learn about Latino roots and the different perspectives on Latino culture and heritage. Our book club and teleconferences are open to all, not just Latinos. We are creating a space for everyone to explore the Latino writer's mind and soul as portrayed through the written word. We encourage you to join our local book club in your city or time zone. We have clubs in 12 cities that are meeting virtually. There's sure to be one that can fit your schedule. If you don't have one in your city, why don't you help us start one? For more information about our book club, visit our website at latinolit.com. So please invite others to join us. Comadre Karen.
Bienvenidas, comadres, compadres, and friends to our October 2021 Zoom teleconference. I'm Karen Gonzalez, book club coordinator for the Denver Las Comadres Book Club. We wish you and your familias health, safety, and love. We continue to pray for all affected by the pandemic. We are honored to have as our guest our author of the month, Julia Amante. Julia is a longtime comadre and a women's fiction author. She lives in California in a home filled with bits and pieces of her Argentine heritage. Julia writes emotionally rich stories about family, love, and the passion of chasing and achieving one's goals. Her novels include Evenings at the Argentine Club, Say You'll Be Mine, and That Was Then. Her latest novel is This Is Now, about a workaholic doctor who returns to the dysfunctional family she left behind to care for her terminally ill mother. Our interviewer tonight is Julia Amante. She is the submissions coordinator for the Las Comadres and Friends Book Club, board member of Empowering Latino Futures, and a stalwart of Las Comadres for over 12 years. Comadre Julia, take it away.
Thank you so much, Karen, Maria, and Tess for that wonderful introduction. And bienvenidos, Comadre Julia.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm very excited to be here.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you again for joining us. We really appreciate it. So let's start with a couple of questions about your latest book, which is This Is Now, which you happen to have nicely displayed behind you there. And I have my collection of your books also displayed behind me here. So when the story opens, the main character gets a call from her sister that her mother has a terminal illness. Aside from being in medical school, why is Margarita reluctant to return home?
Okay, so this is book 2. So as you mentioned, the story starts with That Was Then, and it's her mother's story. And in that book, you meet Margarita, but she had just gone away to college. And there's a hint that something is off, that she doesn't really get along with her mother. She comes back she comes back to town in that book as well. So she leaves school, she comes back because her mother was first diagnosed with cancer in that book. She's going to have surgery, and so she pops in for a little while, but you could tell that there's a problem. She's very abrupt. She's very, she's just very different from her sister. And I never really explained that in that book very much, just that there was something that she didn't get along. She was in a hurry to really leave and go back to school and get away from the town, get away from her family. And I had some questions about that, like, why was she doing this? Why did she act this way? And so in this book, I go into her whole story and what happened. And her father was an alcoholic. Her parents divorced, and when she was little, when she was a very young kid. And so she has these hard feelings. Her childhood was not good. She bounced around from her mother's house to her father's house, and she really just kind of stepped back from the family completely. Decided that she had problems. She had problems relating to both of her parents. She blamed both of them, even though it was mostly on the father's side because of his alcoholism and all the issues there. But she blamed her mother really for being so passive and not fighting back, not doing anything to fix the relationship or to get along. So she goes away to college. She loves her mother, and I hope I make it clear in this book. She loves her mother, but she doesn't understand her. So part of what happens during this book is, yes, she's coming back because her mother is ill again. It's been 5 years now, and she fought cancer. She was well, but now the cancer has come back. And but what I hope to show in the book is that she, as much as she loves her mother, she has to learn to understand her. And we all do, right? We all think that our parents are all powerful when we're young, and then we learn that no, they're just human beings. And her mom had a hard time dealing with having 2 girls and having a husband who was an alcoholic and somewhat abusive. So once she comes back, she spends the time with her mother. She learns this, learns to accept her past, learns to accept herself, and how to really have a relationship, how to trust in relationships again.
I think that there are many of us who have gone through similar issues in our own families. And I'm sure your readers are happy that you're answering questions that were left open in the first book, after the first book.
Yeah.
So the story, as you mentioned, is about the daughter who returns home and to themes that you explore. So what are some of the other things that you want people to think about when they read this book?
So one of the themes I would say is just forgiveness. How do you move on? How do you forgive things that, some things were bad. So she has to forgive her father for the way that he was when she was young. and kind of forgive herself for the reaction. She becomes, a kind of tough kid during while she was growing up. When you've got a father. Now, my father was not an alcoholic, but he had issues. So one of the things I know that I learned was that you take on a lot of that stuff that you see with your parents. You as a child, you don't know why they're doing the things they're doing. And there's different ways of reacting. Some people will be just like that. They'll try alcohol, they'll try substances, and some people are the opposite. I was sort of the opposite. It's like, I'm never doing that stuff. I'm never gonna, he had anger issues. I'm never gonna have those anger issues. So I think Margarita was a lot like her father, and she learns to forgive herself for that too. Instead of dealing with things, she sort of does what her father did. Her father turned to alcohol. She turns to basically leaving her family and not dealing with her issues. And so, one of those themes is forgiveness, forgiving yourself, forgiving your family, because everybody does the best they can. Other themes that I have in the novel is healing. You can't, her mother tells her this at one point, because now she's a medical student. She's almost, graduating. She's doing her rounds at the hospital, and she tells her, you have to learn how to heal yourself, because you can't heal other people until you learn how to heal yourself.
Right.
And that's one of the things that Margarita has to learn. So healing is a big theme in the book as well. And then there's in the romance, there's the second chance at love, the second chance to try again. So that's another theme. It's one of my favorite romance themes. So
it's one of mine as well. I always love, and one of my favorite romance genres for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. And so, I appreciate that you have those different themes in there, because those are things that sometimes we need to be reminded, and sometimes we need to see other people going through that, sharing their feelings, talking about, their hurts, their issues that they've gone through, and healing from it to help us heal.
Yeah,
sometimes
absolutely.
we have to look at others in order to get to that. In the book, we have the dynamics between the two sisters, Margarita and Jessica, and they seem so different. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So in book one, we find out that Grace, the mom, had, because of all the issues with her husband, she ends up having an affair with an old boyfriend, and thinks that she's going to leave her husband and go with this other man, Daniel. And then she decides that no, she really can't do that. She has Margarita, who was at the time 5 years old, and she can't leave her father. She's going to try to work things out with him, and tells her first boyfriend that basically she can't, she loves him, but she can't do this. So she stays married to Angel, the Margarita's father, but ends up pregnant with her boyfriend, with her first love. And so this basically destroys the relationship. If the alcoholism and all that didn't this does.
Didn't do it, right.
So Grace now is left with Margarita being 5 years old and a new baby who belongs to a different man. And so she raises these two girls, and so there's a huge difference. They share a different father, but they also have a very different personality. Margarita has her father's sort of kind of crazy personality, and Jessica is very meek, more like her mother, and just kind of lets everything flow. She just that's the way she takes life. So in this book, they're grown up, and that difference is still there. But Jessica's meekness is now, you can see it with her family. Now she's married and she has two little boys. And she has a very hard time with it, because she got married right after high school. Now she's got two kids. She's got so much responsibility. Her mother's got a terminal illness. And, where in book one, she seemed like she was the one that had things together, that she didn't let things bother her. In this book, we see that, sometimes that difference, that meekness can be difficult, because she doesn't know how to handle life. And Margarita, who is the kind of this wild one, is coming back into this family and saying, okay, I'm going to take over and I'm going to handle things. Even though she doesn't have a good handle on her own life, she knows that they need her. Her sister's sort of falling apart with two little kids. Her mother is ill, and it's up to her. And so this difference between them, again, you could see it because it's, it's so obvious. And it's
Right.
one of the reasons I wrote it that way was I wanted the reader to be able to see, how sometimes two kids, and if you guys have kids, you probably know this, can be so different. They were in the same family, they saw the same things, and yet they can be so different because they take that history, differently.
Yeah, I mean, I have five, I'm the oldest of five girls. My brother's older than I am, but you put me and my sisters together in a room, and not only, our physical attributes are all different, but our personalities are totally different as well. Which is really amazing when you put people together. We all grew up the same way. We all had the same, surroundings and, love and affection and inspiration, but we're all so different.
Yeah. And that's so interesting to me. At least to me, it's very interesting that, I think I noticed it as a mom. How can I have these two kids that were raised exactly the same and they're so different, so, and it's like, you wonder, like, where does it come from? Is it biology? Is it, how can they be so different? They had the same everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, I kind of find that fascinating. I thought I wanted them to be that way, to be they're very different women who deal with the same situation in a different way. When you think that the one that isn't going to be able to deal with it well because her life is kind of crazy is the one that actually deals with it much better than Jessica, Jessica was so young to have all this on her shoulders all of a sudden.
Right.
Yeah.
It's very amazing. So in the book, we have a hero, Ray. He's an architect who has the opportunity to design the plans to renovate a mansion that was the center of a winery empire. His grandparents once lived and worked there, and Margarita's grandparents worked in the California orange groves. Why have your last couple of books, well, we know that it's a continuing story, but had this theme or the similar type of settings? What inspired you to set them there?
Yeah, well, even with Sayobi Mine was in, vineyards. The setting was a vineyard, and I just really, I love that about California. I love that we had that's our history here. Right, we've had, where I live was all orange groves at one point, and a lot of Latinos worked on in the groves, and the same with the wineries. And so when I set, that was then in a fictional town, very much like mine, one of my friends, Terry, who's now doing the social media for Las Comadres, right? She told me, you know what, your book reminded me of where I grew up, where my parents grew up. It was a town called Guasti, and it was all vineyards at that time. And this man from Italy came and lived in Los Angeles for a while, Segundo Guasti, and then he moved out to the Inland Empire and started a winery, a vineyard there, and it was really interesting. So I went out there with her, and now there's nothing there. So there's an airport there, the Ontario airport there. There's a little tiny church. That's the only thing left of that town, and the mansion is still there. So I was really kind of fascinated about that when she told me. I was like, wow. So I started researching the mansion and the family. And again, it was, the Italians came in and he had the money to start the winery, but who were the people that actually made it a success? They were the Mexican workers, there were the African-American workers, there were the even Chinese workers. And Terry says, they lived over there and the Italians lived here, in the nice homes. They lived over there. And it's like, that's really, it's crazy. Same thing here where I live, where they brought, through the Bracero program, they brought in a lot of workers to pick the oranges and work here. And, they lived basically in a tent city. So that's just been California's history, and I found it fascinating. And so I like to set, this will probably be the last book that I set in this in this setting. But I really love it because I think it's part of what has made California. And a lot of Latinos have had, were the people that broke their backs basically to work and make California what it is. And then once these oranges it became not profitable anymore to have them here, well, then they started selling everything off to build homes and subdivisions and all of that. But it became what it is today because of all these people that came and worked, and I wanted to show that. And that was then. It's the grandparents that come here and they worked and created the church where Grace goes, and so it's the family that has created all of this. And with Ray, his family created the town where the vineyards were. So I thought they would make a good, and Margarita tells him at some point, like, who would have thought, all the work that our grandparents did, and now here I am, a doctor, and here you are, an architect. And it shows, I think, the ability and to have that American dream that our grandparents who first came here wanted for their children. Right?
Wow. So one thing that I got a lot from what you just said, but so does this mean that there's not going to be a third book in the series, or is it still early yet?
Yeah, it's a little early. One of the things Terry said to me is, there should be a prequel, like what happened to Grandma. It's like, yeah, that would be interesting. I'm not a historical writer, but it might be interesting to kind of take a look at that. But for now, I think that I'm pretty much finished with the story.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, in this story, there are different types of healers. You have a medical student. Her mother, Grace, is a pediatrician. The great-grandmother was a curandera. And what are you trying to communicate to the readers with your choices of the different types of healers?
Yeah, I wanted to show, first of all, that it is a book about healing, and that when Margarita comes, so the grandmother, like you mentioned, was a curandera, and now she's only in the story through the memories, right? So as Grace gets sick, she wishes her grandmother was still there to give her something to make her feel better. She didn't have the education, but she was able to heal people with with nature, with things that she could use. Grace becomes a doctor. She loves her grandmother. She wants to do the same thing her grandmother does, but she realizes that, she can't really, so she decides to go into medicine. And she does, but she retains a lot of what she learned from her grandmother. So obviously she doesn't use potions or anything in a hospital, right, but she retains a lot of that. She believes a lot in the natural healing. Margarita is too distant. So she doesn't, she's just, she doesn't have, I guess, that emotion and that passion, that connection to the earth that her grandmother and her mother does. And so you can see the difference as the generations move further and further away, that, they start to lose that. But that's one of the things that Margarita gets by coming home and spending time with her mother as her mother is trying to fight cancer. So I like the idea of healing. I think that there's different types of healing. I believe in all of it. I believe in I believe in the natural. I remember my mom, if I'd have a bellyache, she would give me, tea, manzanilla. And it works.
I just had this, my younger sister was here a couple of weeks ago when for the book awards, the International Latino Book Awards, had a little viewing party here, and she had a tummy ache. So I went into my kitchen, I made her the té de manzanilla and put the estrella de anís in there, right? Because that's what my grandmother did for me. And my sister's like, oh, good. Oh, this reminds me, because our grandmother used to make it. And I said, yeah. I said, we used to get that stuff at the Botanica. And she was like, what's a Botanica? Like, I said, okay, now you can probably get the tea in, in your supermarket or whatever. But, we used to go to the Botanica and get these things.
Right.
And make the different teas and so
Yeah.
to help us feel better.
Right.
And there are some of those things I still have in my house here, today.
Yeah. And I think we lose some of it sometimes.
Yeah.
And, and in the story, that's part of, Margarita, she works in ER, everything's crazy and wild. And she's a very, very good doctor, but she doesn't have that connection. And she tells her mom that, I don't have your heart. I don't have this. She says, it's okay. You have other things that you're going to bring to your patients. But yeah, I wanted to show the difference and kind of make it a book about healing rather than making it a book. If you tell somebody you wrote a book about a woman who's fighting cancer and may die, that's not who wants to read that, right? And I didn't want to make it a sad book. I wanted to make it a book about healing, about second chances, about something positive, especially these days.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is something that I so appreciate about a Latino author sharing these parts of our history and our culture with the next generation. Because we may be women of a certain age, but then there's the younger ones who may not know so much about La Botanica, or even our grandchildren who are like this on their tablets and on their phones, know everything about TikTok. But when it comes to these traditions and things that we have, it gets kind of lost. So I appreciate, and I really appreciate when an author throws that little bit of our history into there, so that maybe it'll spark something in the next generation to learn about it or to want to know about it. So thank you for that, Julia.
You're welcome. Yeah, and it's a lot of fun, I think, to add that in there.
Absolutely, absolutely. So is there overall in your book, is there a message that you want your readers to grasp? I mean, you talked a little bit about healing and forgiveness. So is there a message that you want to make sure that they get?
Yeah, kind of the idea that that life goes on. It doesn't end. So, there's the fear, of course, that the mother is going to die, but the mother's not afraid at all. And in the first book, she was afraid, and she was mostly afraid that she was going to die without passing on her history and her stories to her children. But now her mother's not afraid. Her kids obviously are. They don't want to lose their mother. But hopefully the reader gets a sense that it doesn't really matter whether she lives or dies, because what's important is that life continues, that you do get other chances, that it's not over. Your life isn't over when it's over, and relationships are never over as long as you keep trying, as long as you keep working at them, and so that's hopefully the message that the reader gets, that it may seem, you get to a book and it's the end, but it's not the end, right? It keeps going. The story keeps going, even after it's over, in real life and in fiction.
Correct. There's always something that happens, and the happily ever after, or the story continues. It always continues with everyone.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Many of us know that writing and publishing a book is something that takes a considerable amount of time. Considering the current state that we are in the midst of a pandemic, although there's a little bit of light coming up at the end of the tunnel, is there anything that you would have changed in the story if you had the opportunity?
Oh, well, yeah, I don't know. I started writing this book almost after I finished the first one. And then I put it aside because I really wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do with Margarita. I started writing it and I thought, it doesn't feel right. And I put it aside, and then I started working on another book, and it sat there, and I went back and I looked at it, added a few more thing. But again, it wasn't clear. Like, it wasn't my message really wasn't clear at that point. And then last year during the pandemic, I said, I'm going to finish this book. And at that point, it actually did become clear to me. It's like, I don't want this, especially with all the illnesses and people getting sick. I don't want it to be a book about someone being sick. I don't want it to be a book about, I don't want it to be a sad book. And then I kind of understood what the book was going to be about. So I think if I would have started it during last year, if I would have started it during this whole pandemic, I probably wouldn't have written it at all, because I would have just thought, nobody wants to read a book about being sick. It's a lot of people that lost family members, it's just been such a tough year. You want something uplifting. But since I had already started it, I thought, I can make this book uplifting. I can make it about something else rather than just, is mom sick? Is she going to survive? Is she not going to survive? So that it becomes not even a question about whether she's going to survive. I mean, I'm sure the reader wonders, but not for me. It wasn't about that. So I think that being in that situation and also being here and not being able to leave, understanding how important, family is and how important your friends are. I think that helped, because it helped me to focus Margarita a little bit, where Margarita comes back. At first, when her sister calls her and tells her, mom's sick, you need to come home, her first reaction is, I'm not going to come home. I'm in my last year of medical school. I can't leave. And then her sister really lays into her and says, this isn't a choice. That you've been gone all these years. You've always chosen to step away. Anytime that there's something important, you're not here for the family. You can't step away from this. This is our mom. And she realizes that, and she, that realization that, wow, yeah, family is important. And I think it did come from the, the pandemic and everything that I saw. We only have a little bit of time with the people we love. And if we don't take advantage of it when we have them, we really need to, because we never know. Tomorrow, that person may not be here.
Correct. And I think this past year and a half has opened a lot of people's eyes. And I think had that book been set in present day, it might not have been a question. It would have been like, okay, excuse me. Okay, I'm going to go because I can still do my medical courses. Some of them I can do online, and they have different things worked out, but it certainly has been a challenge for everyone this past year. With everything. And so the hardest, you talked a little bit about the different parts of the book and how you put it aside and then came back to it. But what was the hardest part? Was it did you feel like you wanted to make sure you got the healing part right, or the forgiveness part? What was the hardest part of it?
I think the hardest part, honestly, is because I'm a romance writer. I wanted to have a romance in there, and and I wasn't quite sure how to do this. And at the end of the first book, or close to the end of the first book, Margarita meets this guy on an airplane. I never intended to have him as a main character at all. And it was just her being kind of crazy. She meets him on an airplane. He tries to get her attention and she ignores him. But at the very end, when her father comes to pick her up, she just gives him a kiss and they exchange phone numbers. And I left it at that. That first book, he was just kind of a walk-on character. And so I thought, what if she does call him back? What if they had a relationship? So I decided to make him the hero, but it was tough because I had to go back and say, okay, let's, at that point he was an architect there. Well, how do I use an architect in this book? And how do I blend this in so it makes sense? And so it was a little hard to have that. And I wanted to tie that relationship in with everything else that was happening to her as well. So what happens is that they do have a relationship off camera on the book, but she kind of blows it. She thinks because she doesn't trust relationships, he is the love of her life, but she lets him go. And so during this book, part of the forgiveness part is that they have to forgive each other. She has to forgive him for leaving, for basically accepting that the relationship was over, and then trying to come back together. They're friends, they remain friends, but that was hard. It was hard to blend in the romance and have it make sense and have it fit the rest of the story, because it's really a story of her and her family. But I think it worked out. I liked it the way it worked out. Hopefully the readers like it.
All right. So thank you for everything that you've shared about your works and your books. And let's just get to some fun questions now.
Okay.
So if you had to choose a writer, living or dead, who would you consider a mentor?
Oh my gosh. That's a hard question. Well, I think, well, I'll go back to, I mean, I don't want to go back too far. So obviously I started with Jane Eyre and all of that, you know, the classics, but I think what I really loved probably in the 80s, as I was starting to read, you know, romances, as I loved Laurel Spencer books. I don't know if you guys remember her, but she was so great at bringing out emotions. And so those were one of the first books that I started reading and I really loved. And I thought, you know what, if I was going to write like anybody, I would write like her, because she slowly built the relationships, like, you know, a little bit at a time, where you saw how the relationship developed. And I loved the way she did that. So I think that she would probably be, you know, the author that I loved reading the most. And if, you know, if I could write like her, I think I would be happy.
Awesome, awesome. And do you think that being a Latina has helped you to get published?
Definitely. Yeah, I do. I think that I was very, very lucky that when I started going to romance writing conventions, pretty much the first couple of years. So, you know, I'd had plenty of rejections before that, but early on in my career, I went to a romance rights convention, and they in Kensington was starting a romance line featuring Latino characters and Latino stories written by Latino characters. And I do think that I was very lucky at that point, because I listened to the presentation from the editor and I was very excited, and I thought, you know what, I wasn't focused before that. I wanted to write romances, but I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. But once I listened to that presentation, I was like, you know what, now I know what I want to do. I want to write Latino romances. I want to share my experiences, things that I didn't get to read when I was younger. There were no Latino characters in romances. There wasn't any of that. There was nothing fun to read. So at that point, I decided this is what I'm going to do. And so I sent off my manuscript and it was rejected. So right after that, I said, you know, I'm going to send another one. And so I did. And this time I got a call from the editor and saying, yeah, you know, I'd love for you to write for us. And that became my first little romance. But I think that it would have taken me a lot longer if that line hadn't come in right when it did.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's really encouraging to hear for stories like that, because there may be a writer amongst us here on the Zoom call, right, who thinks that, well, nobody's going to read my story. But I think especially today, there's even more opportunities.
Oh, yeah.
They want to make sure that the books that we're reading are diverse as the population is. So
yeah. No, I think that today there's actually more opportunities for Latino writers than there were back then. Because back then, you know, it was brand new. Nobody had done that before until Kensington decided to have that line. And it was difficult for them too, because they didn't know how to market it really, because nobody had done it. They were thinking it was going to be sort of like the novelas and people were going to be very excited about it. But it was different. It was different from, you know, the person who watches a novela doesn't necessarily read those type of books. So I mean, I remember being at a book signing one time and a family was walking by. It was a Latino family. And I was like, oh, good, they're going to stop and buy my book. And so the mom looked at the very racy cover that I had and just kind of geared her kids, you know, to go that way. And so she wasn't going to stop with her family to buy the book because she probably was embarrassed, you know, with her children. And so I think that Kensington had a really great idea, but they were way ahead of their time. And today, I think a Latino writer would have there's a lot more options available, and there's a lot more role models available. And we didn't have that when we first started.
Correct. Yeah, I've seen such a change just in the 12 plus years that I've been with Las Comadres book club. I remember going to the bookstores before then. This bookcase that's behind me was the bookcase that I decided I was going to fill with Latino books. That was my goal. And so that's when my friend introduced me to the Las Comadres book club. But otherwise, I'd go to Barnes and Noble and I would just scan Latino names.
Yeah.
If you had a Latino name, I was going to look. Oh, yes. Okay. A book went in my basket, and I'd buy dozens of books just that way because of the name.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to support them and be a
Right.
part of it. So, but today you're right. There's so many more opportunities, different venues, different ways for people to get their stories out there.
Yeah.
One of them is self-publishing. What do you think of self-publishing?
Well, that's what I'm doing now. I was actually just talking to Caridad Pinheiro this morning, and we were both kind of thinking that we learned a lot by being traditionally published. That I'm not sure that I would have even tried to self-publish if I hadn't been traditionally published first.
Mhm.
And that's because I learned a lot. Like I learned what, the need for the editor and what the editor provides, to the reader. I learned, how does a book get to a bookstore? How do the distributors choose books? And I think having my 20 some years in traditionally published, being with traditionally published, venues and stuff, I learned a lot of that. And so now I can self-publish and kind of know what I'm doing. But I think it would have been very hard and scary to do it before that. And now it is a lot easier now, because it is a lot easier to actually write your book, find an editor, get the book, edited properly, get it formatted properly, finding somebody to do your book cover, and actually getting it up on Amazon. So it is easier. It's a lot of work. It's not, it's not, you're doing it all yourself.
Right.
But I think if you take the time to learn how to do it, it's definitely worth it. But it's also worth it to try to approach a publisher and see if they will purchase your book. Because then you don't have to do it all yourself, and you can learn, a little bit about the publishing world. I think they're both exciting. For now, I want to stick with self-publishing. I may go back to just traditionally published at some point, but I kind of like challenges. So right now I'm kind of challenging myself to see how I do, right?
Right.
Most self-published authors don't sell very many books. They just don't, so we'll see how I do.
Right, exactly. And, good Lord willing, very soon we'll be back to the book festivals and the
Yeah.
fairs and all those things where you can go back out and share your books with the world.
Right.
But we thank you so much, Julia, for sharing your time with us tonight. We
Oh, you're
really
welcome.
appreciate it. And I hope everyone has learned a lot about you, about your characters, and will go ahead and buy her book. Okay.
Thank you very much for having me. I
Thank
enjoyed
you.
being here.
Thank you. Comadre Maria, let's pick the winner of the copy of This Is Now.
Okay, so our winner is, drum roll, please. Dun, 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 dun. Sylvia Mendoza. Sylvia, are you still here?
I'm here.
Wonderful. So Sylvia, if you can put your email in the chat, we will email you. We will email you the details about your free book.
Yahoo! Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you for that,
Comadre Julia.
Maria. Okay, thank you. Comadre Julia, we are so grateful for the insightful interview and for your spending time with us this evening. We enjoyed the sharing of perspectives and insights from your work and your life, and we truly treasured the opportunity to learn about you, and we feel more connected to you. We thank our audience for taking the time to join us this evening for our Zoom teleconference launch, despite all the craziness. And we thank you for those that submitted questions. We'd like to thank all our volunteers without whom this book club and all the associated work would not happen. Mil gracias. Please remember to support our authors by writing a review of their books on sites like Amazon, Goodreads, Barnes and Noble, etc. Those reviews carry weight not only with the publisher, but as well as with other readers. Buy books to support your authors, and if your library doesn't have a book you want, ask them to order it. And please attend your virtual local book club meetings and bring a friend or two. Remember, it's open to everyone, men and women, and not just Latinos. Our November book of the month is The Most Beautiful Girl in Cuba by Chanel Clayton, a historical novel set in Cuba. Our Conversations with book is What's Mine and Yours by Naimia Costa, a fiction novel set in North Carolina. Once again, we are keeping you all in our thoughts and prayers during these times. Thank you for your continued support of our book club and Latino literature. Mil gracias to all. Stay safe and wear your masks. Buenas noches, and always read Latino Lit. Good night.
Night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Julia.